Fractured Lies, Daughter of Sea and Sky, Book 3. Part 3. Ignited. Chapter 27. Gilgamesh! Dom came barreling out of her room and hurtled over the back of the couch like a track star, landing with a neat little bounce on the cushion beside me. Huh? Gayla wrinkled her nose from across the room, looking just as confused as I felt. The Epic of Gilgamesh. It's an ancient poem, and I think it might have a clue for us. Dom had gone full-blown Velma ever since I got back with the second piece of the tablet. I half expected her to pick me up from class in a modern-day mystery machine any day now. Between the two of us, we probably had someone poring over various ancient texts 26 hours a day, desperately searching for anything that could relate to the prophecy somehow, and so far, we'd come up short. "I'll bite," I said. "What's your clue?" Okay, so Gilgamesh was on this journey to find immortality, but he didn't, or at least not in the physical sense. Of course, his story lives on. "Get to it, Dom," Gayla called out. Right, so as he's dying and sad and stuff, the narrator says something about how eternal life wasn't his destiny. His destiny involved the power to bind. She lifted her brows pointedly in my direction before continuing. And something about darkness and light for all mankind. Sounds serious, right? But there's more. There's also mention of a 3-stranded rope that cannot be broken, like a braid. This is good, I nodded thoughtfully. I can see a connection, I think. The prophecy mentioned a white braid of the powers that bind, and we know this is your destiny. Dom pulled a folded-up piece of paper from her back pocket and spread it out on the coffee table. She pointed at the word she'd scrawled out as she read the prophecy aloud, even though we all had it memorized at this point. The daughter of sea and sky, together with the one who ignites her heart, in her centennial incarnation shall form a white braid of the powers that bind. The deliverer alone can wield. But how does the rest of Gilgamesh come into play? I asked. Was he real? Maybe an old Atlantean? Dom furrowed her brows. Well, I haven't gotten that far yet. My phone chirped with a new message, and I took a peek while Dom folded her paper up again. Hey guys, I've got to run. Sean says Millie is freaking out at the apothecary, and he needs some help. Can we come? Gayla stood and straightened her shirt. I've been stuck in this apartment for weeks. It's been 2 days, Dom corrected. But I wouldn't mind getting out either. That cold front is supposed to roll in this weekend, so we should enjoy the sunshine while we still have it. The girls accompanied me down to Millie's shop. It was a beautiful fall day, but I couldn't relax as we walked the city streets. I'd managed to keep my aura covered in blue for a couple of weeks now, thanks to Tate and Millie's magic pills, but it still felt like I was just waiting for the other shoe to drop. There were always plenty of keepers near the Columbia campus, and I found myself eyeing every one of them as we passed, preparing to bolt if they somehow discovered I wasn't a normal Atlantean. None of them paid me any attention, though, which was a good thing. I wasn't very fast on my feet. Meanwhile, Gayla and Dom chatted about the upcoming convention and all the big names who would be attending, including Gayla's dad. She wasn't exactly thrilled about seeing him again. Rossel had disappeared after my little run-in with him at his warehouse, and Gayla's dad was furious about it. As horrible as Rossel was, he was known as the greatest seer in the modern-day world, and Gayla's dad paid good money to have Gayla apprentice under him. I'm sure he's up in Olympus with King Barius, Gayla said, twisting a lock of platinum blonde hair around her finger. He'll be back when it's convenient for him, but I guarantee he's not going to be giving me any more lessons, not after what Everly did to him. I think he got off pretty easy, all things considered, I said, as we walked up to the front door of the apothecary. He did throw a dagger at my face, after all. Some smug little part of me smiled inside, knowing that I was still in possession of his weapon. It had served me well so far, and I had no plans to give it back any time soon. A faint hint of lavender and tea tree oil hung in the air outside the entrance of Millie's shop. Abby was probably making bath bombs again. The bells on the door chimed when we walked through, and at first I wasn't sure if anyone was around. "Hello?" Oh, goodness, I love lavender, but that's so strong it's making my eyes water. Gayla gently rubbed moisture from her lower lids, careful not to smudge her eyeliner. "Hey!" Sean popped up from behind the counter, followed by a red-faced Abby. I grinned. "What were you guys—" Millie cut me off, bursting through the curtain from the back room with an armful of towels. "Here, let me help." "No." Sean held out his arms to take the towels and stop my aunt from stepping behind the counter. "You've done enough." He shot a glare in my direction before dropping back behind the counter. Millie let out an exasperated sigh as she noted me and my roommates at the front of her shop. "Hi, girls. Sorry about the smell. I just knocked over an entire shelf full of essential oils. The big jars." She grimaced. "We hardly noticed," I lied with a smile. "But you look pretty frazzled. Do you need some help here today?" "Help?" Millie giggled, a slight craze gleaming from her blue eyes. "Yes," Sean said, shooing my aunt toward the door. "She could definitely use your help. Millie's been put in charge of the welcome dinner for Maximus and Gloriana this year. They'll be coming up for the convention next week, and normally my mother would host a fancy dinner for them the night they arrive. But this year—" He trailed off. Claudia had basically been ousted from Keeper Society after what happened to her husband in Atlantis. She'd been curled up in her bed, lights off, barely even eating unless Sean was there bringing her food. And his dad, Peter, had disappeared entirely. Not a soul knew where he was, except maybe Claudia, but she wasn't speaking. Not coherently, anyway. "Gotcha. Well, put me to work. What can I do?" "Abby and I can manage the shop," Sean said, dropping his chin, "since I'm not taking part in the convention this year. But I'm sure Millie could use your help with planning the dinner." "Oh, that happens to be my specialty." Gayla stepped forward and looped my aunt's arm through her own. "Let's get you home and see what you've got figured out so far. We'll make this dinner so good they'll want to stay on dry land forever." She gently guided my aunt back to the door as she spoke. Dom scowled in Gayla's direction for speaking so carelessly in front of a human, but Abby didn't seem bothered or confused by her words at all. She must have been too distracted with cleaning up the oily mess on the floor to notice. "Okay," Millie nodded. "Thank you. But are you sure you guys can handle things on your own here?" "We've got it under control," Sean said. "Between me and Abby and the rest of the staff, I don't think you'll need to come in all week. Take your time, try to relax, and come back after the convention. I'll call you if anything comes up." Millie hesitated by the front door before finally nodding again. "All right. I appreciate you girls offering to help. There is a lot to get done in a very short amount of time. Let's go." Chapter 28. Dom and Gayla took turns helping me at Millie's house over the next week. She was uncharacteristically frazzled. My normally calm, cool, and collected aunt had turned into a tornado, bouncing from one idea to the next and leaving a trail of destruction in her path. But my roommates handled it with grace. And Gayla wasn't joking when she'd said party planning was her forte. She knew all the best caterers, florists, decorators, and event planners in New York City. But in the end, Pierre won out. He was one stubborn Frenchman, and he refused to allow some unknown catering crew into his kitchen. So on the big night, it was me who wound up in the kitchen with him instead. Dom and Gayla each had other plans that night, so I found myself stuffing goat cheese into green olives by myself, while Jeeves organized a bar cart and Pierre sautéed something that smelled delicious on the stove. "This has got to be the weirdest thing I've ever done," I said, to no one in particular. So maybe it wasn't the weirdest thing. I mean, I'd sliced off a part of the kraken. But it definitely ranked up there as one of the weirdest human things I'd ever done. I shoved the last bit of cheese into a greasy olive and licked the remainder off my fingers. "Ew," I shuddered. I will never understand people who eat goat cheese. Goats are like the total opposite of fancy. My friend Hattie used to have goats. Her favorite was named Jack Sparrow. He used to jump on the trampoline with us and eat Fruit Loops right out of our hands. "Stories like this are exactly why you are not invited to the dinner." Pierre swiped his hand through the air at me. He was only halfway right about that. I wasn't invited to the dinner, but it wasn't my stories that would embarrass my aunt. It was more about my association with Sean and his family. Being involved with that lot down in Atlantis had marked me as a pariah just as much as them, at least in Gloriana's eyes. It left me wondering how Millie got tapped to host a dinner, being my aunt and all. Sean explained that she was one of the most well-respected Atlanteans in New York. Her wealth and newfound propensity to do the right thing were enough to outshine my youthful indiscretions. But the pressure of getting everything perfect enough to erase my connections to the Bratton family was almost too much for my poor aunt to bear. I peeked out of the kitchen when Jeeves greeted the non-royal family a short while later. The glamour placed on Jeeves and Pierre after the Olympian attack still held strong, and they were under the impression that Millie was hosting the family of some bigwig from the Pharmaceutical Association, the same Pharmaceutical Association that she'd told Abby and the rest of her staff was hosting the upcoming convention. Gloriana stepped through the door first, overdressed as usual. Jeeves, always a gentleman, said nothing about the woman's strange attire. Anastasia was next, wearing a similar full-length gown as her mother, but in a pretty pale mauve, as opposed to her mother's deep navy blue. I held my breath as Jeeves greeted the patriarch of the family next. Maxwell's voice was deep and silky, like a late-night radio DJ. Jeeves stepped to the side, welcoming the man into Millie's home, and as he entered, I was shocked to see that his head barely reached the butler's outstretched arm. Now, Jeeves was a big guy, literally college linebacker huge, but Maxwell was not. I couldn't explain why, but I'd expected the leader of Atlantis to have a bit more of a commanding presence, especially with that voice. "Maxwell, Gloriana, how wonderful to see you!" Millie strutted down from the top of the stairs, looking elegant as always. "And Anastasia, you've grown into such a beautiful young woman." "Thank you." Anastasia dipped her chin in thanks, and when she looked up, her gaze snagged on my doorway. I tensed, ready to pull back into the kitchen, but there was a kind curiosity in her eyes. I smiled at the girl instead. Jeeves turned back in my direction after showing them into the dining room, so I quickly jumped out of the way. "Welp, looks like you guys have it all under control here," I said, snatching a lobster crostini off the hors d'oeuvres plate before Jeeves picked it up. "I'll be outside if you need me." I dashed off toward the back courtyard before they could object. The prep work was all done, and I knew they would be fine without me. Besides, I needed to get a better view of the dinner. I settled onto the cold cement of the patio and wrapped a blanket over my shoulders to keep out the evening's chill. Lemon Drop and Tiny Tim, Millie's mastiffs, quickly found their way to my sides. "You guys weren't invited either, huh?" I held the blanket out for Lemon Drop. She looked like she needed a cuddle buddy, but Tiny Tim was too distraught over being locked outside to care about the blanket. He let out a whimper and pawed at the back door. "Shh, you're gonna get me caught, Tiny." "Are we really resorting to lying with the dogs now?" A flutter of wings announced Al's arrival behind me. "They're better company than birds," he scoffed, a sound I could only hear in my mind. "How's the dinner going so far?" "They're just sitting down, but Millie did a fabulous job preparing everything. I'm sure it'll be great." "Then why do you feel the need to sit out here in the shadows and watch them?" "I just want to." Al had been particularly thorny since I returned from Atlantis. He did not approve of my tactics for acquiring the tablet, and I did not approve of his lecture about Kraken safety. I also found it hard to believe that this feathery friend of mine had no further information about the prophecy. He'd supposedly been my sidekick in every incarnation over the last 12,000 years, yet he couldn't so much as take a guess at what the prophecy meant. According to him, there were long spans of time when we were apart. He was only able to find me in each life after my powers began to manifest. "You're still mad at me, aren't you?" I shrugged. "So be it. But you sitting out here in the cold watching them eat dinner is absurd. Either march inside, tell them you're the deliverer, and get this show on the road, or leave them be. You've got better things to do than watch through a window like a sad little puppy." Tiny Tim whimpered again as if that was his cue. His giant paw hit the door a little louder this time, and everyone inside looked up at the noise. I pressed myself up against the courtyard wall, trying to stay out of sight as Millie stood, apologizing profusely. Then Anastasia stood as well, with one hand raised. There was some brief discourse between her and Millie, but I couldn't see their lips well enough from where I sat to know what was said. Then Anastasia walked this way. "Be careful," Al's voice called out in my mind, followed by the sound of him flying up to a higher perch. Anastasia paused on the other side of the door, her eyes quietly scanning the darkened courtyard until they landed on me. Her mouth twitched into a smile, and she grabbed 2 leashes from their hooks on the wall inside. "Hey, pups." Her raspy voice was light and carefree as she stepped onto the patio and greeted Millie's dogs. "Need to go for a walk?" She cast a quick wink in my direction before attaching the leashes and tugging the dogs toward the gate. I followed, keeping the blanket held over my body in a dramatic sweep low across the courtyard until we stepped out onto the chilled Manhattan street that led us to Central Park. We must have been a sight to behold. One girl, who smelled like goat cheese and olives, wearing a fuzzy blanket around her shoulders like a cape, and the other dressed like a princess, armed with 2 massive beasts on leashes. People in Oklahoma would have gawked at us, but in New York, no one batted an eye. "Hey," I said, once I was sure we were out of earshot. "Did you know I was outside?" "I suspected," Anastasia grinned. "It's what I would have done in your shoes. But I was glad to see you. I haven't heard any big news since you left. How are things?" She wanted to know why we hadn't taken action with the tablet yet. I did make her a promise after all, and it had been a few weeks with no major strides. "Slow going," I admitted. "We only have half of the story right now. I'm not sure what steps to take next." Anastasia nodded. "Well, all of the keeper leaders will be here for the convention. Perhaps you will find a way to get the rest of the story soon. How's Sean?" "He's good." He was better than good. Almost running into a death trap in Atlantis had given Sean a new lease on life, and he was living it to its fullest. For the first time ever, he allowed himself to flirt with Abby, relaxing his guard and finally enjoying her company. He didn't even care about his dad missing. In fact, I suspect his father's absence actually removed some of the weight from Sean's shoulders. But obviously I wasn't going to tell Anastasia all of that. "Were you okay after we left? It was kind of chaotic." "Oh, sure, I was fine. The guard suspected it was Peter who set off the alarm, and they never even noticed I was missing. There's been a search for him since the day you left. They think he stole the tablet." "What will they do to him if they find him?" "Kill him," Anastasia shrugged. But don't worry. There's no reason for them to suspect you and Sean. I made sure to clear our tracks thoroughly." Peter was a jerk, but he didn't deserve to die. I made a mental note to try and locate him before the Atlantean guards did. Maybe I could get him to Portamaris with Driscoll. "Thank you," I said after a beat, "for helping us out of there." "You're the one who deserves the thanks. Just don't let me down." We crossed over into the park and waited as a small group of teenagers passed on the sidewalk, giving us a wide berth to avoid the enormous dogs we had with us. I waited until I was sure we were alone again before dropping my voice to a near whisper and continuing the conversation. "So you said all the royal families would be in attendance at the convention, right? Including the Agarthian family?" My heart picked up at the thought of Tate. I hadn't seen him since before we left for Portamaris. He'd been tied up in some family affairs in Agartha. "Yeah, everyone got into town yesterday." "Yesterday? Why hadn't he called me yet?" Rasputin's warning about Tate working against me flashed through my mind, but I shoved the thought away. If Tate was working against me, he never would have helped Millie turn my aura blue. But why hadn't he reached out? "Is something wrong?" Anastasia lifted her delicate brows. "No, I just think I realized what my next step should be, but I need to get into the convention. Is there any way you can get me on the list?" "I don't think so. My mother would definitely not approve of me adding you to our group. No offense. But maybe Millie can find a way to get you in." It was last minute, but it was worth a try. Tate had promised before he left to keep an eye out for the missing piece of the tablet in Agartha. I had to see him. Chapter 29. "My hands are tied, Everly. I'm sorry." Millie frowned and squeezed my shoulder. "But I will be sure to keep an eye out for anything suspicious. I'll try to find out where Rossel ran off to, and I will definitely let you know if I hear anything about your mother. I miss her too." "I understand." I picked out a necklace from Millie's jewelry box and passed it to her as a finishing touch for her outfit. She was sitting on some kind of panel at the convention today, so I wanted her to look her best, even if they wouldn't allow me in. She'd explained that due to high security concerns, they limited the attendees to those who were absolutely required to attend. Though I didn't see how Gala and Dom would have made the list if it weren't for Gala's father. Unfortunately, he couldn't do anything for me as an Atlantean. A soft knock sounded at Millie's bedroom door. "You ready?" Devon called out through the crack. Millie rubbed a fresh coat of bright pink lipstick onto her mouth and smiled. "Now I am." He cracked open the door and entered with a wide grin as he took in his much older soulmate. "Are you sure I can't just get Devon to teleport me in there?" I asked. "They cast wards over the entire convention center," Devon said. "I can't even teleport us in there. All powers are rendered useless inside those walls." Millie rolled her eyes. "It's Barrius's favorite trick. That man loves to make others powerless at any chance he gets." "Barrius as in King Barrius of Olympus? Rossel's boss?" Millie nodded. "Yes, and like I told you, I'll find out where Rossel is if I can. But there's no way he will show up at the convention after that report we filed on his cronies who ransacked my study." "Right. Well, be careful just in case. Oh, and Millie, will you please ask Tate to call me if you see him there?" I added, as an afterthought. "I will. We'll see you tonight at supper, okay? I'll bring you all my notes." She crossed a finger over her heart. "Thanks, Millie. I'll see you then." I waited a full 5 minutes before pulling out the bag I'd stashed under my aunt's guest room bed, and I changed into black pants and a long-sleeved white button-up shirt. I didn't actually know who would be catering the event, but I'd watched enough TV shows in my life to guess that this was probably the caterer's uniform. Now, I just had to get over to the convention center before the rest of the crew started without me. I was going to be the newest addition to their staff. They just didn't know it yet. I was about 2 blocks away when a familiar voice called out in my mind. "You're a little overdressed for a casual morning stroll, don't you think?" Without slowing, I turned my gaze upward to scan the windowsills and balconies of the buildings that surrounded me. I wasn't sure how much distance could be between us for Al's mind-to-mind communication to work, and I really wished I could communicate back without speaking out loud. "I'm on the street light up ahead, just waiting for you to turn around and go back home." I found him, perched casually on the light as if owls commonly hung out in Manhattan. Meeting his yellow eyes, I shook my head softly. "You're not seriously going to try to break into the convention, are you? That's a horrible idea. They will know immediately that you're not on the list, and if you're not careful, you'll get yourself put on a different list instead." I ignored him, picking up my pace as I passed his little perch. He fluttered up ahead, talking silently into my mind again. "By different, I mean bad. Like hit list kind of bad." I shrugged and picked up into a jog. "Everly, seriously, stop. You're obviously not a human, and no one is going to let you in when they see your aura, even if it is blue. How do you expect this to go down?" I didn't care how it went down. I just had to get closer to the action. If I couldn't actually get into the building without getting caught, then I'd hang out outside until they all left. They couldn't arrest me for hanging out on the street. Of course, I still wasn't sure what exactly I was looking for. All I knew was that every keeper leader was going to be in attendance, and they held any chance at getting the rest of the missing pieces of the tablet. And if I happened to run into Tate while I was there, well, that would be okay too. "Are you really just going to ignore me?" "Yep," I said aloud, not caring who might overhear. I just spotted the catering van pulled down the alley behind the convention center, and I wasn't interested in listening to the dire warnings of an owl anymore. It was showtime. I jogged across the street and waited for people to begin unloading from the vehicle before trotting around the corner. Phew! I wiped fake sweat from my forehead. Looks like I made it just in time. I would hate to be late for my first day of work. 2 guys and a girl stood outside the van wearing similar clothes to my own, though theirs had a company logo embroidered on the shirts. One of the guys frowned his brow. "Who are you?" I stepped up and extended my hand. "I'm Everly. The boss thought you might need some backup with the big event today, so I was asked to start right away. I hope you guys don't mind showing me the ropes." "Where's your apron?" the girl asked, noting my empty hands. "Shoot, I knew I forgot something. Is there an extra I can borrow just for today?" "I'll look," the first guy said. "Follow me." I turned briefly to flash a smug smile at Al, but he was gone. The others got back to work, while the boy walked around to the back of a second van already parked in the alley. He opened the doors and made no effort at small talk as he rummaged through a couple of boxes sitting in the back. The rest of the staff was already carrying chafing dishes into a back door of the building, and I was itching to catch up to them. The door was wide open. It would be so easy for me to just slip inside, unless, of course, some of the wards Devon mentioned were designed to stop those of us who weren't on the list. Maybe Al was right. I shifted on my feet at the realization. What would I do if some kind of magical alarm was set off by my mere entrance into the building? Some shuffling near the door drew my attention away from the van. "Sorry," a familiar voice said. "Pardon me. Excuse me. Oh, hello." The catering girl gawked at the tall, handsome man who had just clumsily bumped into her. Tate winked and then slinked out of the door, trotting a little deeper into the alley away from where everyone was working. "I'll be right back," I said to the boy, who still hadn't found me an apron. "Tate!" I whisper-yelled his name as I neared the spot where he'd stopped, sleepily resting his head back against the wall. He opened one eye. "Hey, why haven't you returned my calls?" Never changing his casual stance, he grinned. "Sorry, babe. I've been busy with work. Babe? I took a step back. Are you okay? I am now that you're here, he winked at me. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see Gayla with a camera, ready to laugh at another successful prank. But we were all alone, other than the catering crew who seemed to have forgotten about me. What happened down there? In Agartha? He lifted his brows, seemingly a lot more interested in the conversation now. Yeah. He thought for a minute before the corner of his mouth pulled up into a half grin. I'll tell you, but it's going to cost you. I had no idea what had gotten into him. A million thoughts rushed through my brain. Had they drugged him? Was he under someone's glamour? Did Agartha simply bring out a different side of him? What's it going to cost? His smile widened. A kiss. I knew he wasn't acting like himself, and yet the words still made my heart leap in my chest. You're joking, right? A nervous giggle escaped me. Nope, not joking. He stepped forward and reached for my hand, rubbing his thumb gently across the back of it before pulling me a little closer. We were nearly touching when he looked down at me with half-lidded eyes. What do you say? A kiss for my secrets? He dropped his chin toward me, and common sense said to push him away, but common sense couldn't put up much of a fight with a face that pretty. It was only then that I began to feel that familiar faint buzz that simmered between us. It was different somehow, though. Tate slid one hand behind my head, his fingers gently weaving into my hair as he lifted my face to his. My heart raced as he closed the gap. Something wasn't right. Titus! Tate dropped his hands, and we both spun toward the voice. The electricity dancing across my skin intensified, and I realized the figure sprinting across the alley toward us was Tate. I looked back and forth between the two Tates. What in the world is going on? That's what I was about to ask, the new Tate said. The tingly buzz was out of control as he approached, pulling me into him. This Tate, the new one, was the real Tate, no doubt about it. Who are you? I turned back to the man I almost kissed. That's Titus, my brother. Chapter 30. Titus put two hands in the air with a laugh. Sorry, man. I haven't gotten to play Thaddeus in years. I couldn't resist, especially with such a willing member of your fan club. My cheeks heated. I couldn't believe I actually almost kissed this guy. What a jerk. Tate frowned, avoiding eye contact with me. You need to get back inside before they lose their minds. You always ruin my fun, Titus pouted. Go. I'll meet you in there in a second. He hesitated with a look that told me he wanted to challenge his brother's command, but eventually Titus turned back toward the building. I waited until he was all the way back through the doors before spinning toward Tate. How have you never mentioned you have a twin? Nice to see you, too. Amusement flashed across Tate's eyes, and even that had my heart swooning in a way his imposter brother never came close to triggering. Maybe Titus was right. I'd forgotten how big of a fan I was of the real Tate. I punched him playfully on the arm, causing a pleasant zing where my skin contacted his. He looked down as though he felt it too, but neither of us mentioned it. I'm serious, I said, suddenly feeling more emotional than the situation called for. I'm sorry. I can see why that might have been a shock to you. I never thought to mention it because I never expected the two of you to meet. You knew I had a brother, and I guess his appearance wouldn't have made any difference to you before now. I thought you had an older brother. He is older, by 8 minutes, and since I was born after midnight, technically we have 2 different birthdays, too. I shook my head. That's wild. I know. Who would have thought that a mere 8 minutes would change the future of Agartha? Tate grew serious again as he focused on me. What are you doing here with the caterers? Definitely not trying to sneak into the convention." "Right." Laughter shone in his eyes again. "And definitely not against the advice of all your friends." "Not all my friends have been answering their phones to give me advice." Tate ran a hand through his hair. "I feel like that was a jab against me." "You're very perceptive." "I didn't know you'd called. They took my phone." "What? Why?" He looked over his shoulder. "Things are a little shaky in Agartha right now. There's a certain part of our population who isn't very happy with some of the decisions my father is making in regard to his heir." "Titus?" Tate nodded. "He doesn't always make the best, life decisions. In fact, he's high as a kite right now on Soma. So understandably, many Agarthans don't think he's fit for the job of king. And I guess my father's personal counsel has advised him to keep me close and cut off from anyone who may try to convince me to stake my claim on the throne. So they took my phone." "Do you even want the throne?" Tate shrugged. "I don't want to be king, but I don't want to watch Agartha implode because my brother is too busy looking for his next hit to lead the territory either." "That's rough. I'm sorry." Tate forced a smile. "I didn't mean to unload all that on you. It's nothing you should have to worry about." "Actually, I do. I'm the deliverer, remember?" I took a showy bow. "At your service." Tate touched his fingertip to my lips, and I thought I might melt into a puddle on the concrete. "Shh. You never know who's listening around here." He dropped his finger again, and my lips were cold without it. I wanted to touch him again, but I couldn't find any reasonable excuse for it, so I resorted to awkward humor instead. "You're right. That catering crew might be staging a coup as we speak." He laughed, glancing down at my attire. "You know, the Olympian guards inside would have had you pinned against the wall the moment you stepped foot into that building." "Not once they tasted my goat cheese stuffed olives." "I'm not sure how to respond to that." "Maybe it's best if you don't." I wrinkled my nose, clamping my mouth shut before I started rambling about Jack Sparrow and trampolines again. "You know there's nothing interesting that ever happens at these events, right? It's just the three races pretending we're all friends by sharing surface-level data about what's going on in our territories. There's nothing useful. They keep their real secrets to themselves." "I know," I admitted. "I'm just tired of sitting around and waiting on the sidelines. I'm ready to take action. And if I can get any kind of clue in here about where to go next, it'll be worth it." "Are you sure?" I nodded. "All right, Everly Gordon of Atlantis. I'm officially requesting your assistance as a member of the Royal Agarthian staff. Will you accompany me to the annual convention of the Keepers?" "Agarthian staff?" "We're not permitted to bring guests, but being royal has its perks. I can assign you a role on my staff." "Is it permanent?" I remembered the Olympian guard I'd seen down in the prison of Atlantis. He could never leave. "No, not unless you request asylum in Agartha. This is just a one-time thing." "If you're sure, then yes. It's gotta be better than this alley. Besides, there's a lot that has happened since the last time I saw you. Is there a safe place we can talk inside?" "I'll see what I can find. But first, I have to attend a couple of meetings. You're welcome to join me if you want. You'll need to look a little less like a caterer, though." He pulled my hair from my ponytail and ruffled his fingers through it, shaking out the waves as it fell to my shoulders. His fingertips on my scalp gave me 10 times the goosebumps I got from a shampoo at my hairdresser. The touch was somehow both warm and tingly cool, and I never wanted it to stop. I was a bit breathless when he pulled his hands away. We locked eyes, the gold flaring slightly in his amber-colored irises, and I could feel that invisible thread pulling me ever nearer. Tate was going to be trouble for me if I wasn't careful. I looked away, snapping the connection. "Let's get inside." We walked slowly back toward the convention center, and I was acutely aware of how closely our hands swung with each step. It was like a magnetic pendulum, and I had to stay focused to prevent my fingers from reaching out to his as we moved together. This isn't the first time I've heard of soma. With that and ambrosia and the other myriad of substances I've heard mentioned on campus, I've got to ask, do keepers have a problem with addiction? We're just like humans in many ways, only our substances are stronger. So, yeah, a lot of keepers do get addicted, unfortunately, but it's especially common in royal families. The pressure of leading a territory gets to be too much. There's a whole world to explore, but royal children are generally confined to a palace in a hidden territory, away from it all. It's hard. I remembered Anastasha's brother, tucked away in the prison in Atlantis, detoxing from some addiction of his own, and a chill ran down my spine. How did you get out? Tate frowned. I proved I could be useful in other ways. Like hunting souls. It was all coming together now, and he must have been particularly skilled if Rossel sought him out specifically for me. Tate paused outside the door. I don't know if the agreement we had in the alley is enough for you to get past the wards. Is it all right if I take your hand until we can make sure you're safely added to the list? I'll try to shield you just in case. Yeah, that's fine. I tried not to smile as his hand slid into mine. Every muscle in my body relaxed a little at the contact. It was like every cell had been yearning for his touch, and now that Tate and I were hand in hand, some of the tension could finally be relieved. I couldn't even care about the confused faces of the catering staff as we hurried through the kitchen, right past the boy who had finally found me an apron. It wasn't until we were out in the main hall of the enormous building that the foolishness of my plan finally hit me. There were thousands of keepers around us. Auras of blue, green, and purple and gold filled the space like a glowing Mardi Gras party, only much stiffer, with attendees wearing business attire instead of plastic beads. There were no white auras, not one. I squeezed Tate's hand and whispered softly, Am I still blue? The bluest, he said with a grin. He led me to a large concierge desk near the front entrance, where a stunningly beautiful Olympian woman sat before a stack of glowing parchment. Excuse me, Tate said to her. I need to verify that Everly Gordon of Atlantis has been added to the list. The woman placed her hand atop the stack and closed her eyes. Everly Gordon, personal attendant for Thaddeus Castellanos of the Royal Agarthian family. She's here. The 10-year-old version of myself immediately thought, Everly Castellanos. It was a bit long, but not too bad. But I shook myself back to the present when Tate dropped my hand. Once again, I felt cold and alone. I wasn't ready to let go of him yet. You're official, he said with a nod. We turned back to the main hall, and I spotted Anastasia surrounded by a wall of guards just up ahead. She saw me as well, and a knowing smile spread across her pretty face. She looked from Tate to me and gave a not-so-subtle wink before getting moved along by her entourage. Was Anastasia winking at you? Oh, that! I don't know. I tried to play it off. How do you know her? I glanced around, unwilling to share too much where all these super-sensitive keeper ears could hear me. She was at Millie's house last night for a welcome dinner. Ah. Tate stepped over to the wall outside of some double doors leading into a large room set up for one of the morning sessions. One more question before we go in here. Sure. I leaned against the wall, happy to catch my breath before entering the room full of Agarthians. I had no idea what to say if any of them challenged me on my new role or tried to ask any questions. Tate stepped in front of me, mischief gleaming in his eyes. He leaned in close enough that I felt his breath as he whispered the question in my ear. Were you really about to kiss my brother outside when you thought he was me? He pulled back enough to make eye contact again, a soft grin pulling at one side of his perfect lips. I pulled my gaze away from his mouth, desperately trying to calm my racing heart as I pretended to be stronger than I was. My whole body felt like it was on fire, in the best of ways. He said he could tell me his secrets in exchange for a kiss. It sounded like a winning business transaction for me. I smirked and pushed Tate back away from me, knowing I didn't have the strength to stay there under his gorgeous gaze any longer. And as we entered the room, I spotted Titus at a front table, surrounded by a small group of guards, but I only recognized one, Osborne. Chapter 31. "What is she doing here?" Osborne rose from his feet, shouting across the room and drawing the attention of every golden-eyed Agarthian in the place. Tate stepped closer to me, angling his body like a shield between me and Osborne. "She's my attendant for the day." "Don't be a fool, Thaddeus. You're flirting with the enemy here. I refuse to stand by while she gathers intel on our private matters just to spoon-feed the information back to Rasputin." A collective gasp from the other Agarthians filled the air. "You really think I wouldn't know if a member of my own staff was working with the enemy? You forget how powerful I am." Even with the wards cast over the building, Tate's power was evident. It radiated from him in a way that left the other Agarthians silent. He normally kept that card tucked away, but I was glad to see him playing it now with Osborne, because secretly it was taking a lot of self-control not to play my own power card. "You better watch how you speak to a member of the royal family, Ozzy." Titus grinned. It was obvious now how glazed over his eyes were, half-lidded and slow-moving. I didn't know how I'd missed it before. "Besides, I kinda like this girl." He gave me an exaggerated wink. "I respect your opinion, Your Highness," Osborne lied with a dip of his chin. "But I really have to insist that she leaves this room. It's a matter of security." Despite your blatant disrespect for the future leader of our territory, I would have to agree that my attendant should go. Not because she is a security threat. Tate chuckled, making eye contact with several of the other Agarthians around the room to ensure they recognized his condescension toward Osborne. But rather because I would hate to subject her to such foolishness. Of course, I'll have to accompany her. As my attendant, she is not permitted to roam the convention without me. Come on, Everly, let's get out of here. "Bring her back for lunch," Titus called out as we made our way back out to the main hall. The building suddenly seemed much more crowded than before. Seeing Osborne had stirred something within me, something sinister that I didn't want to acknowledge right now. I needed to get somewhere quiet where I could calm myself. We hadn't made it more than 10 steps away from the room before Osborne said my name again behind us. I paused, and Tate put his hand lightly on the small of my back, somehow filling me with strength and confidence as I spun around to face the angry hunter on my heels. "I know what you are," he said, and every muscle in my body tensed. "I know you're with the Manticorians, and if you're here, it means Rasputin isn't far behind. But you can tell him that I'm ready for him, and I'm ready to finally take you down once and for all. I'm waiting for any reason at all. So go ahead, do what you came to do. Just know that I'm watching." Osborne sneered and then turned his glare on Tate. "And as for you, we're all just waiting for Titus to screw up so we can lock him away. Once I prove your association with this trash," he jerked his chin in my direction, "we'll lock you up alongside him. I'll finish the job you couldn't, and I will gladly take your place on the throne. It deserves someone who wants it. You were never cut out to be king anyway." I lunged, but Tate's arm stopped me before I could get to Osborne. I wanted so badly to hurt him, to bash in that crooked nose of his, but of course that wouldn't do us any good. Nice monologue, Osborne. Very dramatic. But you can save it for the meeting you're about to be late for. Tate gestured back toward the room. Now leave me. That's an order. Osborne's jaw tightened so hard I expected it to crack, but he managed to hold in whatever insult was on the tip of his tongue. Eventually, he turned back toward the meeting room. But even with Osborne gone, we were surrounded by hundreds or maybe thousands of other keepers bustling around the convention center. And seeing Osborne reminded me of my original task. I had to find the other pieces of the tablet. Now that I had Tate, and maybe even Titus on my side, I wondered if it would be possible for me to search Agartha for the next piece. I need to talk to you. I looked at Tate and dropped my voice to a whisper. Privately. He nodded. There's only one place I trust in this building, but we'll have to get around my father first. Chapter 32. Tate led me over to a glass elevator at the center of the main hall and hit a button on the wall beside it. A glass cage, in the middle of all the most powerful keepers in the world? Obviously the top choice for privacy. Good idea. He tried to hide his amusement. Just get on. I followed him into the small space, actually grateful that we were on full display in the middle of the convention hall. Last time we'd been in an elevator together, it took everything I had to keep myself away from him. Knowing there were thousands of powerful eyes watching now seemed to help numb that sensation. Just a little, though. The doors closed silently behind me, and I noted that Tate had put as much distance between us as he could. That was a good thing. I could ignore the invisible electric thread tugging me toward him if he stayed far enough away. Each of the royal families gets a designated conference suite here at the hall. There are extra protections over the rooms, so sensitive information can be freely discussed. When we were kids, Titus and I used to play around with the wards, looking for any way to tear them down and spy on the other families. But it was impossible. So anything you have to say will be safe within the suite. I think I'm less afraid of being overheard than I am of meeting your dad. If he's been trying to keep you cut off from everyone, he probably won't be too thrilled to see that you've picked up a new attendant. You don't need to worry about him. It looked like there was more Tate wanted to say, but he bit down on the words. It was probably wise, as we had just reached the top floor. The elevator doors opened to reveal a sky bridge leading over the road outside and into an attached hotel next to the convention center. Neither of us spoke as we meandered down a hall over plush, colorful carpet. We passed a couple of other small groups of keepers, none of the races mixing together much, and I only got a couple of raised brows from the Atlanteans when they saw me trailing Tate. We'd been walking maybe 5 minutes and gone up another elevator when a door slammed open at the end of the hotel hallway. Shoot, Tate said under his breath. I think that's our suite. Sure enough, 3 tall Agarthians marched out into the hallway, looking like they didn't have time for anyone or anything that may cross their path. They were on a mission. Next came a silver fox of a man, strikingly handsome. His salt and pepper hair was the only thing that aged him at all, and I noted the similarities between him and his sons immediately. Well, we found your dad, I whispered. 3 more Agarthian guards followed in back, effectively surrounding the king. 2 of them landed their scrutinizing eyes on me, but the king seemed indifferent. He hardly even greeted his own son. Everything all right? Tate asked as his father rushed by us. Fine, the king replied gruffly. He definitely didn't look fine, though. A couple more of the guards were eyeing me now as well. Keep it moving, he barked at his people. Tate didn't press any further. He scooted me back toward the wall, keeping one arm spread before me like a bodyguard, even though I was supposed to be the one attending to him. I didn't mind it, though. The warmth radiating off his skin brought me a sense of comfort. The crowd rushed by us and turned a corner at the end of the hall without once looking back. "What was that all about?" I asked, once they were gone. "I have no idea, but judging by the look on his face, it was much more urgent than he wanted me to believe it was." Tate stared after them down the empty hall for just another moment, before shaking his head and gesturing toward the suite they'd exited. "At least we have the room to ourselves now." My stomach flipped a little bit at the thought. It was fine. Everything would be fine. There was no good reason for me to freak out at the thought of being alone with him. It's not like I would lose all self-control without a chaperone. I took a deep breath as he scanned a card and unlocked the door. No one was inside, but it looked like the king and his guards had been engaged in a meeting before hurrying out into the hall. Several half-finished glasses of a golden beverage sat throughout the room, condensation leaving glistening trails down the sides of the glasses and pooling onto the coffee table in the center of the room. The suite was huge, more like an apartment than a hotel room. There was the living area that we'd entered into, a small kitchenette, and 2 separate wings of what I assumed were individual bedrooms. "This place is fancy," I said, taking it all in. "Are you sure there's no one else here? Where are your guards?" "I don't get any guards." Tate plopped down onto the middle cushion of the couch. "Those are reserved for the king and the heir. I forfeited my right to royal coddling when I joined the hunters." I sat next to him and immediately felt that invisible thread tighten. It was a jolt, warm and electric in my chest, pulling me hard toward Tate. I refused it, leaning back into the arm of the couch instead, and Tate scooted down to the other arm, leaving a full cushion open between us. "You feel it too, don't you?" His golden gaze jerked up to mine, and his hand moved toward his chest. "Huh?" "That tingly buzz, Never mind." One look at his blank expression stopped me in my tracks. I felt like a fool. There was no way I was about to explain how I felt some invisible connection pulling me toward him. That was a one-way ticket to crazy ex-girlfriend territory. Not that I was his girlfriend, just a friend, and a girl, who was mildly attracted to him. It could never work between us, even if I was attracted to him. He was Agarthian, I was Atlantean. It was forbidden. I didn't want him bad enough to be cursed and die for it. "Okay, so you're sure we're alone?" I asked, getting back to what really mattered. "Positive. What did you want to tell me?" "I went to Atlantis." "How was it?" He turned his body toward me, folding one leg under as he pulled it up onto the couch. "It was nothing like I imagined." I explained our heated run-in with Peter and Anastasha's crush on Sean. He stared wide-eyed as I told him about the tablet and our speedy escape through the ocean. Then I mentioned the Kraken. "You did not cut off a piece of the Kraken," he said with a laugh. "Oh, I totally did. You can ask Sean. I think he's still got the slimy little tentacle," I shuddered. "Nasty monster." "You're amazing," he said, shaking his head with a smile. I dipped my chin, trying to hide the blush I felt creeping into my cheeks. "I'm just doing my job, fulfilling my destiny and all that." When I looked up again, I realized we'd both somehow drifted closer to the center during my tale, but I didn't want to scoot back again. Anyway, we got the tablet back to Driscoll. "Was he able to interpret it?" I nodded and recited it to him from memory. "The daughter of sea and sky?" Tate rubbed his forehead. "And you don't know who your dad is, right?" "Nope. That might make this whole thing a lot easier." He repeated the words again under his breath. "Sea makes sense, being from Atlantis and all. But sky? I can't think of any Atlantean powers that involve the sky." "My mom was a messenger." "Yeah, but that's more about bending reality than flying through the air. Olympus is known as a city in the sky, and there are Agarthians who can control the wind and move clouds and stuff. But for Atlanteans? He shook his head again. I've got nothing. What about talking to owls? Tate's brows pulled together. That seems like a very specific question. Athena could talk to owls, and she was Atlantean, right? Oh, he nodded. Yeah, that seems like a stretch, though. I'd have to ask Al about it the next time I saw him. I hadn't even really considered it from that angle before. Tate leaned toward me with that crooked grin that only meant mischief again. Maybe we should focus on the next line of the prophecy instead, the part about the one who ignites your heart. Dom thinks it's referring to my soulmate. That makes sense. Tate's grin widened. Although, you looked pretty ignited by my brother earlier. I punched him again, intensifying the electric tug between us. I told you, it was just a business transaction. He looked down at his arm, his grin fading slightly. I do feel it. Feel what? My heart jumped in my chest. The tingly buzz, I think you called it. He reached for my hand, igniting the skin where he touched. His thumb rubbed gently over my knuckles, creating a fizzy sensation. It almost tickled, but in a much more serious, personal way. Oh, was all I could say. It's strange, isn't it? At first I thought it had to do with black magic. You know, Rossel told me you were deep in the stuff. I thought it was some ancient hunter instinct coming through, warning me that you were bad news. But now I know I'm the only one who feels it, other than you. Do you feel it around anyone else? I shook my head, unable to speak. My heart was pounding so loud, I thought the neighbors in the suite next door might complain. It keeps drawing me back to you. I can't seem to get enough. I thought about you the whole time I was in Agartha. I searched the entire palace for that tablet, just so I could see you smile when I brought it back. My smiles aren't cheap, but I bet you could have found an easier way to get one. I grinned, just to prove my point. I wasn't sure how else to respond. I'd never seen Tate behave so sincerely. I wonder, he said, meeting my eyes. The gold flared, creating a subtle glow that I couldn't look away from. Wonder what? My voice was barely a whisper. What would happen if I kissed you? I didn't even realize how much closer we'd gotten until he rested his hand on my cheek. Every cell in my body was alive, dancing and whirling in the electric sensation humming between us. There's only one way to find out. It was more than a dare. It was a request. I needed to know, needed to feel his lips on mine. And Tate did not disappoint. Chapter 33. Tate Castellanos was not my first kiss. I got a swollen lip from Chad Rankin's braces one year at church camp. Owen Griggs smooched me on the hay in his daddy's barn, and Zach Bajek made me feel like the prettiest girl in Oklahoma when he kissed me under the stars at homecoming. But every one of those moments was laughable compared to what I felt when Tate's lips found mine. I'm not even exaggerating when I say it felt like the world shifted. Everything changed in an instant. The thread that seemed to tie us together was now an unbreakable rope holding us close, never letting us go. It was stronger than the grip of the Kraken. It was stronger than I cared to admit, honestly. It was something ancient, something bigger than life itself. We leaned into the kiss more, neither of us able to contain ourselves, nor willing to try. And the sound of blood rushing through my ears from my pounding heart was almost enough to drop out the incessant tapping noise at the window. Almost. Tate pulled away an inch or so, smiling down at me, but his smile quickly faded. "Everly!" His hand slid from my shoulders down to my wrists, extending my arms. "You're glowing." I looked down, but saw only skin. Tap, 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 tap. A quick glance over to the window confirmed what I somehow knew I'd see. A little white owl sat perched on the windowsill, yellow eyes wide, as his little feet moved nervously from side to side. Al tapped again. Tate followed my gaze. "It's an owl." Then back to me. "Daughter of sea and sky, do you have the soul of Athena?" "Apparently," I shrugged. "Do you mind if I let him in?" "Go ahead." Tate ran a hand through his hair, looking as confused as I felt. The connection between us was still palpable, but it seemed less urgent and more confident somehow as I strolled away from Tate and toward the window. It was like the buzzing had been satisfied, and it was replaced with a bond of some kind. I lifted the window, and Al hopped inside. "The Manticorians are here," he said, silently in my mind. "Here? At the convention? That's not good." "Did the owl tell you something?" Tate stood and met us by the window. "Is everything okay? Your glow is bright." Al blinked and tilted his head at a strange angle. "It's more than an aura, Everly. You're actually glowing white." I looked down again as Tate gently ran his hand back and forth over my skin. I saw nothing but chill bumps in response to Tate's touch. "It's beautiful," he whispered. "But we can't let anyone see you like this. When's the last time you took your aura pills?" "This morning. I didn't want to risk it fading while I was here." "I wonder if it's a reaction to that kiss." Tate's eyes were round, the gold a deeper, richer hue than normal. A butterfly flipped over in my belly, and despite Al's bad news, I wanted to kiss Tate again and see just how bright my glow could get. I glanced nervously at Al. "Oh, don't worry. I already saw everything." There was judgment in those sentient eyes. "But I don't care right now. Like I said, Manticorians, here, now. You've got to get out before they destroy the place." "We've got to go, Tate. Al said the Manticorians are here." "Al?" He looked at the creature. "Al the owl?" "Alpheus," he called out in my mind, but of course Tate couldn't hear him. "Yeah." "Okay, but I don't know how we're going to get you out of here with you glowing like that." I walked over to the window and quickly marked it off our list of options. We were at least 10 stories in the air. Even with my new keeper's strength and power, I didn't think I'd survive a fall like that. "I'll go check the hull," Tate said, pacing nervously. "Stay here. You'll be safe as long as you're in my suite, I promise." He ducked out into the hall a moment later, leaving me alone with Al. "Are the Manticorians here for me?" "I don't know for sure, but it's likely." I rubbed my hands over my face. They wouldn't kill me. Rasputin had made it clear that he wanted me on their side. But based on the stories I'd heard from Millie, they wouldn't hesitate to kill anyone else who got in their way. That meant Tate was in danger. "Hey, Al, what do you know about my soulmate?" "What soulmate?" "Like from past lives. Who was he?" Al flew over to the back of the couch. "You've never found your soulmate." "Never?" He blinked. "You've taken lovers over the centuries, but it's never been anything more than casual. You've never had children, never bonded with another soul." "What would it feel like if I had?" Al turned toward the door. "They say it's different for everyone, and you just know. But Everly, it's impossible for you to have a non-Atlantean soulmate. The races can't mix. You'd be cursed and killed." "I know." I ran a hand across my arm, where Tate had touched me moments earlier, my skin still singing from his contact. But what if I'm not Atlantean? What if I'm something different altogether? Uttering the words aloud felt good. I was emboldened by the thought. My inner Athena rose up and cheered, and I began to see the situation at hand in a whole new light. "I'm starting to wonder if that might just be true," Al said. "In that case, bring on the Manticorians." Chapter 34. Al explained some of my favorite fighting moves from previous lives, which would have been great had I been armed with a spear or a longbow. Unfortunately, I had nothing but my fists. I'd even left Rossel's dagger at home, not thinking I'd be going into battle today. Obviously, Al's wings weren't teaching me much in the way of hand-to-hand combat, but still I wasn't afraid. I was more eager than anything. Deep down, I was confident that my inner Athena would pull through for me somehow. The sound of a key card in the door sent Al into the air. He flew to the windowsill and turned back to me. "Stay close to Tate. I'll wait for you downstairs." Then he was off. I turned back just in time to watch Tate stumble through the front door, gag in his mouth, and arms held tightly behind his back. My blood turned to lava, and I immediately stepped forward, ready to destroy whoever had him bound. But the look in Tate's eyes cautioned me to stay back. The next person through the door was the last man I expected to see. Peter Bratton entered, shoving Tate further into the room and sneering in my direction. "We meet again," he said with an evil grin. "Let go of him." I wasn't afraid of Peter. I'd already won one fight against him. There was no way I'd let him walk away again, not after seeing what he'd done to Tate. I moved forward once more, only to see another slow-moving body enter the room. She was ancient, older than old. Her hair was so white it looked translucent, and she probably had cobwebs in her ears. Her eyes were blacker than a starless sky, her skin pale and wrinkled like a raisin. She was Olympian, but not like any other I'd ever seen, and she wasn't the last. Standing a full 2 feet taller than the hunched old woman was Rasputin, looking absolutely delighted to see me. "Don't be rude," he said to Peter in his thick Russian accent. "We are the guests here. We do not want to wear out our welcome." "No one said you were welcome here, especially not when you've got a royal son of Agartha bound up like a criminal." "He tried to hit me," Peter said. "You probably deserved it," I spat back. Now. Rasputin raised his arms like he was calming a pair of fighting siblings. Meanwhile, the old woman glided deeper into the suite, almost floating across the ground the way Rossel did, then plopped down on the couch. Peter grabbed Tate's arms and shoved him forward as well. "That's not necessary. Untie him." "Not until we know he won't strike against us," Rasputin said, before turning to me with a pout. "You never came back to see me, and there is much left for us to discuss. Have you given any more thought to my offer?" "What offer? Going to work with you?" I scoffed. "Never. I've heard about the things you've done." "No one can help you like I can. Do you see anyone else able to blow down these simple wards? Anyone else with enough power and resources to know where you are at all times? Your prince here could not have saved you if we'd meant harm. What would you have done?" "I would have fought, and if I died, then so be it. It would be more honorable than joining you." "You say that now, but you know so little." Rasputin stepped toward me, and I felt Tate tense from across the room. He was seated on the couch beside the old Olympian woman, who downed one of the half-finished Agarthian beverages left over from before we arrived. "Take Peter here." Rasputin stopped a foot before me and gestured toward the sitting area. He was so underappreciated by his people that they chased him out, even when he put his career on the line to warn them of you. But don't worry, my darling. He knows you are what we need now. He has joined the right side now, and look how much good it has done him. He is more powerful than ever." Peter lifted the entire couch with Tate and the old woman still on it. He didn't even break a sweat. He set them back on the ground and grinned at me, cracking his knuckles. I maintained an even expression, or tried to, anyway. "I see you got rid of the wards to block your powers. Have they been destroyed across the entire convention?" "Only for those with the right connections," he winked, and stepped uncomfortably close to me. "I am more powerful than they are. Join me, and I can help you maximize your power as well. It is the only way you will be able to accomplish what the prophecy asks of you." He paused, reaching an old hand out to my face. "The glow is quite lovely. It is different from the powers of the other keepers. Lucky for you, I know about the lost arts. I know the magic that the rest of the world has forgotten. The time is growing near for you to put your powers to use. You can feel it too, can't you, darling?" His wrinkled fingers grazed my cheek, and Tate leaped up from his spot on the couch, only to be quickly brought to his knees by Peter. "Get your hands off of him!" My voice was like a growl, something foreign I'd never heard before. My heart beat in my chest like a war song, building me up. I could feel the power flooding my veins, ready to break free at a moment's notice. It was stronger now than I'd ever felt it before, like a tidal wave sweeping me off my feet. I wasn't fully in control of it. Peter must have heard the power in my voice. He raised his hands in the air, but remained close enough to knock Tate back down if he had to. I was seconds away from putting Peter in his place when I saw a flash of white near the window. Rasputin glanced that way as well. "There are more," Al said in my mind. "They're everywhere out here. We're going to have to fight back." I nodded to show that I understood. Rasputin looked from the window to me and back again, a small smile curling at the corner of his mouth, pulling up his long mustache. It faltered when the door slammed open into the wall at the front of the suite. I whipped around to see who had joined us, only to be more disheartened than ever. "I knew it," Osborne shouted. "As soon as I saw you here, I knew Rasputin would be close behind. Your game is up." He raised his arm, and I braced myself for impact, but it wasn't me he aimed for. A strong fist struck Rasputin squarely in the jaw. It should have knocked the old man down, but he somehow vanished and reappeared on the opposite side of the room. Osborne let out a roar and lunged for him. With the flicker of a smile, Rasputin played his trick again. "Now is our chance," Al's voice said in my mind. I'd forgotten he was there. "We'll attack while they're distracted. We need to get Tate free so he can help us. Aim for Peter on the count of 3. Ready?" I nodded. 1, 2. On 3 we converged. I went for Peter's legs while Al dive-bombed his face. Secretly, I hoped he pecked the man's eyes out. I had a surprising amount of momentum, definitely more than Peter was expecting. Not only did I knock him off his feet, but I sent him flying over the coffee table and into the opposite wall. A yell came from somewhere out in the hall, and I wondered how many other Manticorians we would soon be facing. At least I wouldn't have to do it alone. I dropped to Tate's side, yanking the gag from his mouth and ripping the restraints from his wrists. "That was amazing," he said breathlessly. "Less complimenting and more action." I pulled him up to his feet. "Also, thanks," I added with a grin. "Are your powers working at all?" His face tightened into a look of concentration, but nothing happened. "Stay down, Peter." His voice contained the many layers I'd heard before when he went into siren mode, but it felt weak, and it was completely ineffective. Peter stood, lip curled as he turned back to face me. More yelling poured in from the hall, and Al's voice rang out in my mind again. "They're coming!" I turned back to the door, ready to take on whoever Rasputin had behind him, but all I saw was a crowd of other keepers, pale-faced and slack-jawed, as they took in the fight in our room. "Not there," Al said. "At the window." Peter barked out a laugh as I discovered the real threat rising up outside the building. Through the window, levitating in the air 10 stories off the ground, was a small army of strange-looking humans. They had no auras as far as I could tell, but there was something off about them. "Witches," Tate whispered. Rasputin appeared from thin air just feet away from me with a wide grin. "Are you sure you don't want to reconsider my offer, darling?" Chapter 35. This time it was Tate's fist that swung for Rasputin's face, but the man was quick. He didn't fight fairly, but he could certainly get out of the way in a jiffy when he needed to. Rasputin appeared near the window, mouth moving silently, as the army of floating witches shifted to an almost single-file line coming toward the building. Al flew across the room like a bolt of lightning, headed straight for the Manticorians before they could reach us. Tate was already moving back toward Rasputin. I ran over and grabbed his arm. "You go help Al. I'll handle him." "Are you sure?" I nodded. I was positive that I wanted to be the one to put a stop to Rasputin and his army of evil. But more than that, I didn't want Tate to get hurt. I knew Rasputin wouldn't hurt me because I had what he wanted, power. "Just keep the witches out of here if you can." Tate listened without putting up a fight, and his confidence in me boosted my own. I marched over to Rasputin without any real clue as to what I was going to do. I just knew I wanted to stop him. From my periphery, I saw Osborne run out into the hall. I heard him yelling, but I couldn't quite make out his words. My only focus was on the evil old bearded man before me. "Don't you touch him!" Peter's voice boomed behind me. Some sense I didn't know I possessed felt him coming, and without even pausing to look over my shoulder, I instinctively thrust my hands out to the sides and heard Peter's body hit the floor. Power surged white-hot through my limbs. Wards or no wards, nothing was holding me back. But Rasputin didn't look afraid. If anything, he looked almost proud. "Well done, darling." I flicked my wrist at him next, feeling the heat of power gather into my hands and fly out toward the man. Rasputin met the surge with a hand in the air, calmly lifting his palm toward me and effectively halting the magic I'd thrown his way. "I don't want to hurt you. I wish you would not try to hurt me either. Come, let me show you how to use that power you harbor. I have much to teach you." I tried again to throw something his way, and again it was blocked. Tate stood by the window, knocking out any witches who Al hadn't already thrown off course. There was some scuffling out in the hall, and the sound of Peter groaning on the floor behind me. I was aware of every movement, every action taking place around me. And as I continued to move toward Rasputin, the warrior part of my brain kicked into high gear, evaluating every object in the room along with its ease of use and potential for massive damage if used as a weapon. I'd become a machine, and I loved it. The noise from the hall grew louder, and I heard gasps along with the shout of a man in power. "Move over!" Tate turned from the window, an unreadable expression on his handsome face. I couldn't even fathom what he might have been thinking as his father entered the room, along with Osborne and the small group of guards who'd accompanied him out earlier. "There," Osborne pointed to me. "That's the girl I warned you about. She led Rasputin right to us. If there's anyone to blame for Titus's disappearance, it's her." We were standing in a room with the leader of the Manticorians and a gang of witches flying outside the window, and all Osborne could think about was throwing me under the bus. "What a vengeful idiot!" I snorted. Al took the words right out of my mouth. But no one else found the situation funny at all. Tate's father looked at me for a moment, but he was much more interested in Rasputin. "Hello again, your majesty." Rasputin's voice dripped with condescension. "Where's my heir?" Rasputin grinned. "How should I know? I'll ask you one more time. Where is my heir?" The king's voice boomed, shaking my bones. Even the witches took pause at the authority he commanded. "Titus is missing?" Tate stepped forward, but his father held out a hand to silence him. The gesture made me angrier than it probably should have. "Listen to me, you crazy old man. I am backed by some of the greatest guardians of Agartha. Hand me my son, and I will let you leave, never to return. Don't, and I will allow my team of fire-wielders, shapeshifters, and sirens to do with you as they please." "We both know that cannot happen," Rasputin replied calmly. "They have no power here, and I do." "So do I." I sent a blast of magic toward the old man, finally catching the king's attention. Rasputin stumbled, losing his balance, but he didn't fall like Peter. I wasn't sure if my powers had already been somewhat used up, or if Rasputin was simply powerful enough to withstand them. It didn't matter, though. He was off balance enough to provide an opening for attack. "Go!" the king shouted, and his guards seized the opportunity to lunge for Rasputin. Some tried their powers and confirmed that they did not work under the wards. Others went straight for the man with fists and knives. Rasputin played the same party trick he'd done with Osborne earlier, disappearing and reappearing at random across the room. It was infuriating, and the Agarthians grew angrier with every dodge. I joined Tate and Al near the window, helping to fight off any other witches that tried to join in on the fun, while Osborne grappled with Peter in the living room. All the while, the old Olympian woman stared blankly into dead space, her eyes black and unmoving, completely indifferent to the chaos taking place around her. One large swipe of my power through the air took out an entire wave of the witches, buying us a moment of time to survey the damage in the room. Tate's father paced, barking out orders as the guards tried again and again to take Rasputin down. I expected the Manticorian to destroy them all within minutes, but he surprisingly made no moves to injure anyone. He simply dodged their attacks, grinning with every move. Peter was a different story, however. With his powers strengthened and Osborne's powers dead, he easily overcame the younger man and made straight for the king at his first opportunity. "Don't even think about it," Osborne said, running to save his leader from harm. Peter swatted him away easily. The king tried to fight back as well, but it was no use. Peter wrapped the king in a stranglehold, red-faced and gasping for air. No one stood a chance next to Peter's strength and finesse under these circumstances. No one, except me. "Let him go, Peter. He's just looking for his son. You know what it's like to care about your son." Peter sneered. "My son turned on me." "That's not true," I said, stepping closer. I saw the crazed look in his eyes and knew we were treading on delicate ground here. "It's not too late for you to come back to us, Peter. Come back to Atlantis. Come back to our people. Show them you can do the right thing. Just let the king go, and you'll be recognized as a hero, the man who saved the annual convention." He yanked harder on the king's neck. Tate's muscles were coiled, and he was ready to pounce on the man at any moment. But he saw the look in Peter's eyes just as well as I did. One wrong move could mean disaster. "Atlantis doesn't care about me. They won't care about you either. Rasputin was right. Your only option now is to join us. They'll slaughter you for that aura. Once they know who you really are, you're dead." That's enough." Rasputin appeared inches away from Peter and placed a hand on the man's arm. "Not another word. Let me speak with the king." He'd no more than finished his sentence when Osborne came sprinting at him out of nowhere. He'd intended to strike Rasputin, but his target vanished, as he'd done so many times before, and Peter, misinterpreting Osborne's move as an attack against him, struck as well. The crack of Tate's father's neck under Peter's massive arm was sickening. His body went limp instantly, and Peter dropped him to the floor. "No!" Tate yelled. Something clicked within me. Time stopped. The room went silent, motionless. I walked slowly over to where the king lay dead on the floor and shook my head. Surely there was something I could do. If I could stop time, perhaps I could reverse it too. I tried. I tried again and again and again to find a rewind button until the tears streamed down my face. Nothing worked. I looked up to where Tate still stood with his face twisted into shock and grief, and I felt broken, useless. What good were my powers if I couldn't use them when it mattered? I looked back at Rasputin then. He was still like the others, but there was something about the expression on his face that left me feeling uncomfortable. I got the sense that I was being watched, that he knew exactly what was happening. The feeling threw me off, and I willed time to kick back into gear again. Rasputin fixed his gaze on me and winked. Then, in a flash, he was gone. He'd left the premises entirely this time, along with Peter and every one of his witches. They were all just gone. All that remained was the damage they'd done. Broken glass lay on the floor beside a dead king of Agartha. The guards nursed light wounds, and Osborne dropped in despair down to the king's side. My heart ached for Tate and his loss. But more than that, it ached for the loss of this world as we knew it. Rasputin was on the loose, the king was dead, and strange power pulsed through my veins. I was pretty sure I'd created an impossible bond with Tate that would one day kill me, and despite myself, I stood in that messy suite, silently wondering just what exactly my connection to Rasputin really was. What if he wasn't lying? What if he really could help me? Chapter 36. "What have you done?" Osborne stood and wiped his forearm across his wet nose. "All of this for her? Your father is dead, Thaddeus. Dead. Your brother is missing. And it's all because you were too weak to carry out a simple task. You should have killed her the first time." Tate was still too shocked to respond, staring down at his father's lifeless body. A couple of the guards gathered around to console him, while the rest went to do crowd control on the keepers that curiously gathered around the entrance to the suite. "You've got it all wrong, Osborne," I said, trying to calm the warrior soul rising up again in my chest. "You got the king killed. You frightened the man who had the king's life in his hands. You attacked when you should have paused. War is about more than taking every life in sight. It's about knowing when to strike and when to hold back. It's also about having the spine to do what needs to be done. Tate is too weak." I was on him like a flash of light, my arm pressed against his throat, holding him to the wall. "Do not disrespect him. He is stronger than you know, and from where I stand, it looks like he may be your new leader." Tate glanced in my direction. "What?" Osborne cursed loudly. I released him from my hold and turned to Tate. "If it's true that your brother is missing, I assume that leaves you in line as the next heir to the throne, right?" "We'll bring it to the council," one of the guards said, resting a hand on Tate's back. They'll tell us how to proceed." "What happened in here?" Gayla's voice exclaimed from the door. A moment later, she pushed through the crowd of nosy onlookers, followed by Dom. "Oh, Everly!" She rushed forward and threw her arms around my neck. "You're glowing!" "We heard Rasputin was here," Dom added. Then, noticing the king, she gasped and threw a hand up over her mouth. "You need to get out of here," Tate said softly. "Osborne will try to blame this on you, and you'll be locked up without a trial. Let me explain what happened and maybe get a telepath to confirm it. The guards will have my back. Find Sean to protect you until I finish up here. Not that you need any protection." He tried to smile, but the pain of losing his father was still fresh. "Was there a seer here?" Gayla stood stone still in front of the couch. Her eyes had gone dark, and her expression was unclear. "I can smell the magic in the air." She spun slowly, as though searching for something, then knelt before the coffee table. "Look." We gathered around to see what she'd found. Drawn out by an ancient finger dipped in the water of the condensation on the table were 3 words: "The Fire Lake Blade." "What does it mean?" I whispered. I couldn't smell the magic as Gayla could, but I felt it. Something old and powerful hung heavily in the air. It called to me in the way the tablet's pieces did. "I'll explain later. Get to Sean. I'll meet you at the apothecary as soon as I can." Tate ushered me to the door, but I made sure to give Osborne one last steely look before leaving. It was a warning. Chase me out and you're done. Judging by the clenching of his jaw, I think my message was received. "Move, people!" Dom led the way, pushing a clear path through the crowd full of gaping keepers. Whispers filled the hall as we made our way through. Word about the fight had spread fast, and it seemed like everyone from the convention had made their way over into the hotel. So much for keeping my glowing white aura a secret. Millie and Devon spilled out of an elevator down the hall just before we disappeared into the stairwell. "There you are!" She rushed forward with tears in her eyes. "Hurry, let's get out of the building so Devon can get you back to safety." We hurried down the stairs, and Devon wasted no time teleporting Millie and I into the back room of her shop the moment we stepped foot on the sidewalk. He left again, and a moment later returned with Gayla and Dom. "Millie, is that you?" Abby peeked through the curtains, startled to see such a large group of us suddenly sitting around the table in the back of the apothecary. Millie did a poor job of playing it cool. She tried to smile, but her hands were still visibly shaking. "We had a break between sessions and decided to come back here for a pit stop. We came through the back door. Sorry I didn't say anything when we arrived." Abby looked skeptical, but didn't have time to respond before Sean popped his head through the curtain as well. "Do you mind taking over up front, Abby? There's a woman looking for natural arthritis relief, and I'm not sure what to suggest." She frowned. "All right." The second she was gone, Sean fixed his gaze on me. "Holy cow, Everly! You're glowing like a light bulb. What on earth happened?" Millie fixed us all some kind of calming herbal tea while I explained everything that took place with Rasputin and his Manticorians. I told them how the Agarthian king died and Titus apparently went missing, but I left out the part about Tate and I and our possible new bond. I wasn't even sure what to say about it. I just knew that something was different. "How many people saw you?" Sean asked, waving his finger up and down. "Looking like that." "A lot," I admitted. "They're already talking. Osborne will probably tell them I'm working with Rasputin, but Tate thinks the other guards will defend me. I just don't know." I watched Millie's expression as we discussed Rasputin. There was still a nagging suspicion in the back of my mind that he may be more connected to me than I'd ever guessed, but I was afraid to voice my question aloud. Millie gave no indication that she knew anything more than I did. "Everly," Abby called out from the front of the apothecary. "You have a visitor." I ran through the front door, feeling the warmth in my chest before I ever saw him there. Tate stood just inside the door, looking only slightly disheveled despite all the action that had taken place earlier. Through the window I spotted Al as well, watching through the glass with those sharp yellow eyes. "Hey." My feet moved of their own accord. Tate walked forward as well, that invisible rope yanking us together. The only difference was that neither of us fought against it now. We met in the middle of the shop, and Tate slid his fingers into my hair, pulling my face up to his. He kissed me, and again I felt like the world shifted around us. His touch fed the power within me, physically strengthening me as our mouths moved together as one. "Ahem." Millie cleared her throat. We pulled away to find our friends all gawking along the side of the wall. I didn't care. I stared into his golden eyes, which reflected the same relief I felt. I needed that, needed him on some deeper level I didn't yet understand. "You're safe," he whispered. "I am, but it's time to figure out where we go from here." Chapter 37. "I always knew you two were gonna get together eventually," Gayla grinned, then clarified. "Not like through a vision or anything. You've just got chemistry." She did a little shimmy. Dom was less enthused. She stood off to the side with a frown, slightly shaking her head. She knew I thought there was something more to my connection with Tate, but she didn't believe it. It was understandable, considering everyone else in the history of the world who tried to bond with a member of a different keeper race met certain death. But this was different. "What happened after we left?" I asked. Dom cleared her throat and gestured toward Abby, the human who was supposed to be oblivious to all things keeper. "It's fine," Tate said with a shrug. "My powers are working fine again. I'll erase all of this from her mind when we're done." Abby furrowed her brows, but made no comment. Sean looked wistfully in her direction, stepping a little closer in case she became afraid by what was about to be revealed. "We went straight to the council. They'd already heard about what happened, of course. I think all of New York knows by now. And it's true. Titus is gone. Apparently, Osborne made some calls after we ran into him earlier. He raised the alarm about you being in the building. He was still convinced that you were connected to Rasputin, so he had my father send out all the available guards to search the perimeter for him, or any of the other Manticorians. They wanted to stop him before he tried to enter the convention." "So that's where they were going when we went up to your room?" Tate nodded. "But Titus went missing somewhere between the time we spoke with Osborne and when my father arrived. They suspected he'd gone out in search of another hit, but all of his usual spots were empty. He's a master of sneaking away, so it's not terribly unusual. There's a chance he'll still turn up." He frowned. "But you don't think so?" Tate shook his head. "No. I saw the way Rasputin grinned when my father accused him of taking Titus. I think it's all connected somehow." "Why?" "Maybe Rasputin knows about this." Dom stepped forward, motioning toward Tate and me with her hand. "If he really does want you on his side, and he knows that you've got some kind of bond with Tate, maybe he was deliberately trying to put Tate into power. It makes sense if he thinks it will get him closer to his goals. And I'm sorry about your dad," she added to Tate. "Well, it worked. The council moved to make me the interim ruler until Titus can be located." "How do you feel about that?" I asked quietly. He shrugged. "It doesn't matter how I feel. It's done. But there is some good news to come of it. That message on the table back in the suite about the Fire Lake blade, I can get you there now." "What do you mean?" "The Fire Lake, is in Agartha." "No," Millie stood. "There is no way you're getting her involved with that." "Why, what is it?" "There's said to be a blade at the very center of the lake, but the entire thing is engulfed in blue flames. Thousands of lives have been lost in an attempt to retrieve the blade. I won't allow you to be next." Why would so many risk their lives for a blade? I didn't understand the appeal. "Because whoever wields the blade is invincible, or so the legend says." "But we don't even know if it's real." Millie threw her hands into the air. "No one has ever seen it." "It's real," I said, "and I'll get it." "Whew!" Abby clapped from the corner. "If anyone can do it, it's you." We all turned to stare at the mortal girl. "What? You really think I haven't picked up on things in my time here? I don't understand all of it, but I can tell by the way people look at Everly that she's special. I might not be some powerful being like you all are, but even I can sense that something big is going on." We exchanged looks, none of us knowing how to respond to that. Dom rested her gaze on the girl for a long while, presumably reading her mind. "She knows a lot, like a lot. "Why haven't you ever said anything?" Sean asked her. Abby shrugged. It seemed like the kind of thing I shouldn't speak of. Sean released a breath and pulled Abby in for a hug. "It feels good in a way. I like that, you know. But I'm sorry we're going to have to erase your knowledge again." "I don't know," Dom said, tilting her head slightly in Abby's direction. "I really think our secret might be safe with her." I grinned. "Welcome to the club, Abby. You reacted a lot better to it than I did." "But my answer is still no to the blade," Millie said firmly. Devon tried to take her hand to calm her down, but she shrugged him off. "With all due respect, Millie, I love you, but you're not in charge of me. I'm an adult." "You can't even get into Agartha." "She can." Tate took my hand. "As the interim ruler, I can allow anyone in who I deem acceptable." "You think I'm acceptable?" I asked, grinning up at him. He smirked. "Most of the time." A small squeeze of his hand sent another wave of power coursing through my veins. "But Osborne is livid. He'll do whatever he can to get the decision reversed. He doesn't think I've had enough training to rule, so we'll need to move quickly, just in case they remove me from power." "None of that explains how you expect to keep her alive in a lake of literal flames," Millie said. "Water." I looked at my aunt. "I'm Atlantean. I'll just make water." "You can't just make water," Sean said. "Keepers may not be able to do it, but I bet the Deliverer can. Besides, I think we're one step closer to figuring out this whole prophecy now that I've found the one who ignites my heart." My cheeks warmed as I spoke the words aloud, but another squeeze from Tate's hand left me feeling a little more sure of it. "Everly." Dom stepped forward, her brows pulled together with concern. "It doesn't work like that. The prophecy is referring to your soulmate, and it's not possible for Tate to fill that role, no matter how much chemistry you think you have." "Soulmate or not, he ignited something, and I don't mean that in the way you think," I added, noting Gayla's smirk. "Nothing about me is normal. My aura is white, my powers are unheard of. I can talk to owls for crying out loud." I threw my hands back toward the window, where Al blinked from his perch on Millie's shop sign. "Is it so hard to think that maybe my soulmate breaks conventions too? And on that note, is it possible that I come from a lineage of rule breakers?" "What do you mean by that?" Millie put her hands on her hips. "The prophecy refers to me as the daughter of sea and sky. My mother is of the sea, but my father? What if he's not what we thought? Tate mentioned that some Agarthians can manipulate the wind and clouds in the sky, and Rasputin was Agarthian, right? Rasputin? Yes. I put up my hands to calm my aunt. He has done nothing to hurt me, nothing at all. He kept calling me darling, and he legitimately looked proud when he saw my powers back at the hotel. Is there any chance my mother may have run into him at some point and, bonded? The question sent a chill down my spine. I hated to even ask, but I had to know. No, she said, vehemently shaking her head. Tilly wouldn't dream of getting close to that disgusting man. Besides, Dom added, Rasputin already had a soulmate. He can't sire any more offspring. I hoped she was right. I would never want to call Rasputin my father, but I wasn't fully convinced. Anyway, I think we need to open our minds to the fact that the impossible is actually quite possible when it comes to me and this prophecy. So I'd like to go with Tate. I'd like to at least take a look at this flaming lake and see what I can do. And maybe we'll be able to find another piece of the tablet while we're in Agartha as well. Devon stepped forward and put his hand on Millie's back. Look at them, Mills. It's real. As real as you and me. You know he won't let anything happen to her. Tears filled her eyes as she finally relented, giving us the smallest of nods. Okay, but please, Everly, please be safe. I will. I leaned into her embrace, staying still for as long as she needed. This wasn't goodbye. It was just the next step in our journey. I bid adieu to Gayla and Dom next, telling them to behave while I was away. Then came Sean. Look out for your dad, I whispered as I hugged his neck. Give him some grace. He's done bad things, and he's definitely in with the wrong crowd right now. But I think he's broken. Let's try to piece him back together before we write him off entirely. Sean pulled back, looking a little glassy-eyed himself. Thanks, Ev. Be careful. Finally, I came to Abby. I grinned at the girl. I can't believe you knew something was up this entire time. She smiled back at me. I can be surprisingly crafty when necessary. Now, go get that blade, girl. Show him what you've got. All right, I said, joining Tate's side again. I guess we're doing this. I'm glad. He pulled me in close before turning to Devon. Can you get us to Kentucky by any chance? Kentucky? I whirled around to face him. Agartha is in Kentucky? Tate grinned. Only the entrance. Let's go. I can't wait to show you my world. I didn't know what we would find, but I knew I would be safe with Tate. I had never been more sure of anything in my life. I took his hand and a deep breath. Devon stepped up beside us, and in a wink, we were gone. This has been Fractured Lies, Daughter of Sea and Sky, Book 3, written by AR Colbert, narrated by Jennifer Groberg. Copyright 2023 by AR Colbert. Production copyright by AR Colbert.